consciousness, but also to place my brain and body into lots of different kinds of states depending on which meditation I do. I also love that the Waking Up app has lots of different types of Yoga Nidra sessions. For those of you who don't know, Yoga Nidra is a process of lying very still but keeping an active mind. It's very different than most meditations, and there's excellent scientific data to show that Yoga Nidra and something similar to it called non-sleep deep rest, or NSDR, can greatly restore levels of cognitive and physical energy, even with just a short 10-minute session. If you'd like to try the Waking Up app, you can go to wakingup.com/Huberman and access a free 30-day trial. Again, that's wakingup.com/Huberman to access a free 30-day trial. This month on the Huberman Lab podcast, we're talking all about physical performance. So that means athletic performance, recreational exercise, weightlifting, running, swimming, yoga, skills, and skill learning. Today, we're going to talk about and focus on skill learning. We are going to focus on how to learn skills more quickly, in particular motor skills. This will also translate to things like musical skills and playing instruments, but we're mainly going to focus on physical movements of the body that extend beyond the hands, like just playing the piano, or the fingers, like playing the guitar. But everything we're going to talk about will also serve the formation and the consolidation and the performance of other types of skills. So if you're interested in how to perform better, whether or not it's dance or yoga or even something that's just very repetitive like running or swimming, this podcast episode is for you. We're going to go deep into the science of skill learning, and we are going to talk about very specific protocols that the science points to and has verified allow you to learn more quickly, to embed that learning so that you remember it, and to be able to build up skills more quickly than you would otherwise. We are also going to touch on a few things that I get asked about a lot, but fortunately recently I've had the time to go deep into the literature, extract the data for you, and that's mental visualization. How does visualizing a particular skill or practice serve the learning and or the consolidation of that practice? Turns out there are some absolutely striking protocols that one can use. Striking meaning they allow you to learn faster, and they allow you to remember how to do things more quickly and better than if you were not doing this mental rehearsal. But the pattern of mental rehearsal and when you do that mental rehearsal turns out to be vitally important. So I'm excited for today's episode. We're going to share a lot of information with you, and there are going to be a lot of very simple takeaways. So let's get started. Before we get into the topic of skill learning and tools for accelerating skill learning, I want to briefly revisit the topic of temperature, which was covered in the last episode, and just highlight a few things and clear up some misunderstandings. So last episode talked about these incredible data from my colleague Craig Heller's lab at Stanford. He's in the Department of Biology, showing that cooling the palms in particular ways and at particular times can allow athletes or just recreational exercisers to do more pull-ups, dips, bench presses per unit time, to run further, to cycle further, and to feel better doing it. There really are incredible data that are anchored in the biology of the vascular system, the blood supply, and how it's involved in cooling us. Many of you, dozens of you in fact, said, wait a second, you gave us a protocol in this episode which says that we should cool our palms periodically throughout exercise in order to be able to do more work. But on the episode before that, on growth hormone and thyroid hormone, you said that heating up the body is good for release of growth hormone. And I just want to clarify that both things are true. These are two separate protocols. You should always warm up before you exercise. That warm up will not increase your body temperature or the muscle temperature to the point where it's going to diminish your work capacity, that it's going to harm your performance. The cooling of the palms, which is really just a route to cool your core in an efficient way, the most efficient way in fact, is about improving performance. Heating up the body with exercise and focusing on heat increases or using sauna for heat increases is geared toward growth hormone release, which is a separate matter. So you can do both of these protocols, but you would want to do them at separate times. So just to make this very concrete before I move on to today's topic, if you're interested in doing more work being able to do more sets and reps per unit time and feel better doing it, or to run further, or to cycle further, then cooling the palms periodically, as I described in the previous episode, is going to be the way to go. If you're interested in getting growth hormone release, well then hot sauna, and I offered some other tools if you don't have a sauna in the episode on growth hormone and thyroid hormone, is going to be the way to go. Okay, so those are separate protocols. You can include them in your fitness regime and your training regime, but you do want to do them at separate times. And as a last point about this, I also mentioned that caffeine can either help or hinder performance depending on whether or not you're caffeine adapted, because of the ways that caffeine impacts body temperature and all sorts of things like vasodilation and constriction. It's very simple. If you enjoy caffeine before your workouts and you're accustomed to caffeine, meaning you drink it 3 or 5 times or more per week, 100 to 300 milligrams is a typical daily dose of caffeine. Some of you are ingesting more, some less. If you do that regularly, well then it's going to be just fine to ingest caffeine before you train. It's not going to impact your body temperature and your vasodilation or constriction in ways that will hinder you.
Say controller is not correct. I should hope the guy's not upset because I bumped it. Why is he standing there in the corner? So the guy leaves. Maybe he just lost connection. So it looks like controller's not working like it should work. Didn't, he's back. He's back. Nice.
Do that regularly, well then it's going to be just fine to ingest caffeine before you train. It's not going to impact your body temperature and your vasodilation or constriction in ways that will hinder you. However, if you're not a regular caffeine user and you're thinking, oh, I'm going to drink a cup of coffee and get this huge performance enhancing effect, well, that's not going to happen. Chances are it's going to lead to increases in body temperature and changes in the way that blood flow is happening in your body, and in particular on these palmar surfaces and in your face. That is going to likely diminish performance. So if you enjoy caffeine and you're accustomed to it, so-called caffeine adapted, enjoy it before you're training. If you do not regularly use caffeine, then you probably do not want to view caffeine as a performance enhancing tool. And while we're on the topic of tools, and because this is a month on athletic performance and exercise and physical skill learning, I want to offer an additional tool that I've certainly found useful, which is how to relieve the so-called side stitch or side cramp when running or swimming. This actually relates to respiration and to the nervous system, and it is not a cramp. If you've ever been out running and you felt like you had a pain on your side, that pain could be any number of things, but that what feels like cramping of your side is actually due to what's called collateralization of the phrenic nerve, which is a lot harder to say than a side cramp or a side stitch. But here's the situation. You have a set of nerves, which is called the phrenic nerve, P-H-R-E-N-I-C, the phrenic nerve, which extends down from your brainstem, essentially, this region, to your diaphragm to control your breathing. it has a collateral, meaning it has a branch, just like the branch on a tree, that innervates your liver. And if you are not breathing deeply enough, what can happen is you can get what's called sometimes a reference pain. Reference pain is probably going to be familiar to any of you who have ever read about how to recognize heart attack. You know, people who have heart attacks will sometimes have pain on one side of their body, the left arm. Sometimes people that have pain in a part of their back will suddenly also get pain in their shoulder or part of their face. This has to do with the fact that many of our nerves branch, and are, meaning they're collateralized to different organs and areas of the body. And the way those nerves are woven together, it's often the case that if we disrupt the pattern of firing of electrical activity in one of those nerve branches, that the other ones are affected too. The side stitch, the pain in your side, is often because of the contractions of the diaphragm, because of the way you're breathing while you're exercising, running or swimming or biking. And as a consequence, you feel pain in your side, but that's not a cramp. The way to relieve it is very simple. You do the physiological sigh that I've talked about in previous episodes of the podcast and elsewhere, which is a double inhale through the nose, very deep, and then a long exhale. And you might want to repeat that 2 or 3 times. Typically, that will relieve the side stitch because of the way that it changes the firing patterns of the phrenic nerve. So the side stitch is annoying, it's painful. Sometimes we think we're dehydrated, and you might be dehydrated, but oftentimes it's just that we're breathing in a way that causes some referenced pain of the liver. We call it a side stitch or a side cramp, and you can relieve it very easily through the double inhale, long exhale. That pattern done 2 or 3 times. Often you can continue to engage in the exercise while you do the double inhale, exhale, and it will just relieve itself that way. So give it a try if you experience the side stitch. Some people I know are also doing the double inhale, long exhale during long continuous bouts of exercise. I actually do this when I run. We have decent data, although these are still unpublished data, that can engage a kind of regular cadence of heart rate variability. So there are a number of reasons why this physiological sigh can be useful, but it certainly can be useful for relieving the side stitch or so-called side cramp. Let's talk about the acquisition of new skills. These could be skills such as a golf swing or a tennis swing, or you're shooting free throws, or you're learning to dance, or you're learning an instrument. I'm mainly going to focus on athletic performance. There are basically 2 types of skills: open loop and closed loop. Open loop skills are skills where you perform some sort of motor action and then you wait and you get immediate feedback as to whether or not it was done correctly or not. A good example will be throwing darts at a dartboard. So if you throw the dart, you get feedback about whether or not you hit the bullseye, you're off the dartboard, or you're some other location on the dartboard. That's open loop. Closed loop would be something that's more continuous. So let's say you're a runner and you're starting to do some speed work and some sprints, and you're running and you can kind of feel whether or not you're running correctly, or maybe you even have a coach and they're correcting your stride, or you're trying to do some sort of skill like a hopscotch skill, which maybe you're doing the ladder work where you're stepping between designated spaces on the ground. That's closed loop, because as you go, you can adjust your behavior and you can adjust the distance of your steps, or you can adjust your speed, or you can adjust your posture, and you are able to essentially do more practice per unit time, but you're getting feedback on a moment-to-moment basis. Okay, so you have open loop and closed loop, and just to make this very, very clear, open loop would be practicing your tennis serve. So let's say that you set a target on the other side of the net, you throw the ball up, and you hit the ball, it goes over. That's open loop. You'll know whether or not you were in the court, you were on the location you wanted to hit, or close to it, or not. That's open loop. Closed loop would be if you're in a regular cadence. So maybe you're learning a swim stroke, or maybe you're trying to learn a particular rhythm on the drums. So maybe you're trying to learn a particular beat. I'm not very musical, so I'm not going to embarrass myself by giving an example of this, although later I will, where you're trying to get a particular rhythm down, and if you're not getting it, you can adjust in real time and try and catch up or slow down or speed up, etc. Okay, so hopefully you'll understand open loop and closed loop. You should always know before you try and learn a skill whether or not it's open loop or closed loop. And I'll return to why that's important shortly. But if you want to learn something, ask, is it open loop or closed loop? There are essentially 3 components of any skill that involves motor movement. And those are sensory perception, actually perceiving what you are doing and what's happening around you. So what you see, what you hear. Sometimes you're paying attention to what you're doing specifically, like the trajectory of your arm or how you're moving your feet if you're learning to dance. Sometimes you're more focused on something that's happening outside of you, like you're listening for something in music, or you're paying attention to the way your partner is moving, etc. So there's sensory input. Then there are the actual movements. Okay, so there are the movements of your limbs and body. And then there's something called proprioception. And proprioception is often discussed as kind of a sixth sense of knowing where your limbs are in relation to your body. So proprioception is vitally important. If I reach down and pick up this pen and pick it up, I'm not thinking about where the pen in my hand is relative to my body, but proprioceptively, I'm aware of it at kind of a sixth sense, deeper subconscious level. I can also make myself aware of where my limbs are. And typically when we learn, we are placing more focus on proprioception than we do ordinarily. So if I get up from this chair and I happen to walk out of the room, I don't think about where my feet are landing relative to one another. But if my leg had fallen asleep because I had been leaning on one of the nerves of my leg or something like that, and my leg feels all tingly or numb, I and you, if this were to happen, you would immediately notice a shift in gait. It would feel strange. I'd have to pay attention to how I'm stepping, and the reason is I'm not getting any proprioceptive feedback. Now, skill learning has a lot of other dimensions too, but those are the main ones that we're going to focus on. So just to remind you, you need to know open loop or closed loop, and you need to know whether or not, you need to know that there's sensory perception, what you're paying attention to, movements themselves, and proprioception. And there's one other important thing that you need to know, which is that movement of any kind is generated from 1, 2, or 3 sources within your nervous system, within your brain and body. These are central pattern generators, which are sometimes called CSPGs. CPGSs. CSPGs are something entirely different in biology. CPGSs, this just goes to show that I have a module. CSPGs are chondroitin sulfate protease glycans. They have nothing to do with this topic. CPGSs are central pattern generators. These CPGs are in your spinal cord, mine and yours, different ones, and they generate repetitive movements. So if you're walking, if you're running, if you're cycling, if you're breathing, which presumably you are, and you're doing that in a regular rhythmic cadence, central pattern generators are controlling that movement. After you learn how to walk, run, swim, cycle, do anything really, much of the work is handed off to these central pattern generators. And there were experiments that were done in the 60s, 70s, and 80s that actually looked at decerebrate animals and even decerebrate humans. These are humans and animals that lack a cerebral cortex. They lack much of the brain, and yet they can engage in what's called fictive movement. So it sounds like a kind of barbaric experiment. I'm glad I wasn't the one to have to do them, but this is the stuff of neuroscience textbooks, that cats or dogs or mice that have their neocortex removed, put them on a treadmill, they'll walk just fine. And they will adjust their speed of walking just fine, even though they basically lack all their thinking, decision-making brain. It turns out humans that have, unfortunately, massive stroke to their cortex and lack any neocortex, but preserve these central pattern generators, will also walk just fine, even though they lack any of the other stuff in the brain. So these CPGs or CPGSs are amazing, and they control a lot of our already learned behaviors. When you're really good at something, CPGs are controlling a lot of that behavior. And that's true also for a golf swing, even if it's not really repetitive. Somebody who's really good at golf, it's going to call it a tee. You put the ball on the tee. I show my knowledge of golf. I've only done mini golf, frankly. but someday maybe I'll learn how to golf. But you set the golf ball down and swing. Set the golf ball down, swing. Central pattern generators are going to handle a lot of that. If I were to go to the golf course, if I were to go out there, put a ball on the tee, my central pattern generators would not be involved in that at all. The moment I get, bringing the club back to swing, it's going to engage other things. And the other things it's going to engage, because I don't know that behavior now or then, is upper motor neurons. We have motor neurons in our cortex, in our neocortex, that control deliberate action. And those are the ones that you're engaging when you are learning. Those are the ones that you have to pay attention in order to engage. And that's what's happening. For instance, if I decide I'm going to reach down and pick up my pen, which I rarely think about, but now I'm thinking about it, and I'm going to do this in a very deliberate way. I'm going to grab with these two fingers and lift. My upper motor neurons are now involved. Okay, so upper motor neurons are very important, because a little bit later in the episode, when we talk about how to use visualization in order to accelerate skill learning, it's going to leverage these upper motor neurons in very particular ways. Okay, so we have CPGs for rhythmic movement, upper motor neurons for deliberate unlearned movements or movements that we are in the process of learning. And then we have what are called lower motor neurons. Lower motor neurons are the ones in our spinal cord that send little wires out to our muscles, which actually cause the firing of those muscle fibers. Okay? So the way to think about this is you've got upper motor neurons, which talk to CPGs and to lower motor neurons. So it's really simple. And now you know most everything there is to know about the neural pathways controlling movement, at least for sake of this discussion. So anytime we learn something, we have to decide what to place our sensory perception on, meaning what are we going to focus on? That's critical. If you're listening to this and you're the type of person who likes taking notes, this should be the second question you ask. Remember, the first question is it open loop or closed loop? The second question should be, what should I focus my attention on? Auditory attention, visual attention, or proprioception. Should I focus on where my limbs are relative to my body, or should I focus on the outcome? Okay, this is a critical distinction. You can decide to learn how to do a golf swing, or learn how to shoot free throws, or learn how to dance tango, and decide that you are going to focus on the movements of your partner or the positions of your feet. Maybe you're going to look at them. Maybe you're going to sense them. You're going to actually feel where they are. Or maybe you're going to sense the position and posture of your body, which is more proprioceptive. Okay, so you have to allocate your attention, and I'm going to tell you how to allocate your attention best in order to learn faster. These are the sorts of decisions that you have to make.
This is an EU tournament.
For you, you don't have to think about whether or not you're going to use your upper motor neurons
and
your lower motor neurons or not, because if you don't know how to do something, you're automatically going to engage your upper motor neurons, and if you do, you are already, then you're not going to use your upper motor neurons. You're mainly going to rely on central pattern generators. You are always using your lower motor neurons to move muscle. So we can really simplify things now. I've given you a lot of information, but we can simplify it. Basically, open loop or closed loop, that's one question. And what am I going to focus on? And then your neurology will take care of the rest. So now I want to talk about realistic expectations. Somewhere in Hollywood, presumably, it got embedded in somebody's mind that instant skill acquisition was possible. That you could take a particular pill, or you could touch a particular object, or you could have a wand wave over you and you would suddenly have the skill. And so that is the result of Hollywood et al. It doesn't exist, at least not in reality. And I love movies, but it simply doesn't exist. Then the self-help literature created another rule called the 10,000 hours rule. And frankly, that doesn't really match the literature, at least the scientific literature, either. I like it because it implies that learning takes time, which is more accurate than the Hollywood et al. Instant skill acquisition rule, which isn't really a rule, it's a myth.
And it's up to
but
anybody.
The 10,000 hours rule overlooks something crucial, which is that it's not about hours, it's about repetitions. Now, of course, there's a relationship between time and repetitions, but there are some beautiful experiments that point to the fact that By simple adjustment of what you are focused on as you attempt to learn a new skill, you can adjust the number of repetitions that you do, you adjust your motivation for learning, and you can vastly accelerate learning. Some of you may recognize this by its internet name, which is not a scientific term, which is the Super Mario effect. There's actually a quite good video on YouTube describing the Super Mario effect. I think it was a YouTuber who has, I think, a background in science. And he did an interesting experiment. And I'll talk about his experiment first, and then I will talk about the neurobiology that supports the result that he got. The Super Mario effect relates to the game Super Mario Brothers, but you'll see why at the end. But basically what they did was they had 50,000 subjects, which is an enormous number of subjects, learn a program, essentially taking words from a computer program or commands for a computer program.
For 4,000 grades, they give me a silent ad. Right. That's not even painted.
So these are the sorts of things that computer programmers will be familiar with, but other people won't. And those commands are essentially translate to things like, go forward, and then if it's a right-hand turn in the maze, then go right and continue until you hit a choice point, etc. So it's a bunch of instructions, but the job of the subjects in these experiments were to organize those instructions in a particular way that would allow a little cursor to move through the maze successfully. Okay? So basically the goal was, or at least what the subjects were told, is that anyone can learn to computer program, and if somebody can just organize the instructions in the right way, then they can program this little cursor to move through a maze. Very simple.
Very interesting.